On average, 70% of your BMI correlates with your parents. And they've done this, the way that they've been able to do this is by doing twin studies that are separated at birth. So you manage to keep the genetics the same, but put them into different environments.
Is this true? Is it true that 70% of your weight is determined by your genes, or that 50 to 80% of your IQ is genetics? Well, what he's referring to here are the results of the famous twin studies. More specifically, he's talking about those conducted by the American psychologist Robert Pullman. Fortunately for everyone, the results of those studies are a bit more nuanced than simply stating that X percentage is determined by your genes. So, in this video, we're going to explore the 3 limitations of the twin studies and how we should interpret the results. So, let's get started. Throughout the field of behavioral genetics, scientists have tried for a long time to figure out the best way to calculate the effect of genes on your behavior, but the results were always flawed because it was really hard to separate nature and nurture. The reason why it's difficult is because if we just observe the resemblances between a parent and his child, since they both live in the same home, we can't really be sure if the resemblances are due to shared environment or to shared genes. But then, some scientists got a genius idea. What if we observe twins separated at birth? They would both have either a 50% or a 100% similar genotype, but their environment would be completely different. So we could attribute most identical traits to genetics, and that's when the twin studies were born. Here's a list of what the twin studies have been able to conclude so far. So there's autism 70%, there's general intelligence 50%, there's also school achievement 60%, height 80%, weight 70%. Now, these results are true. They didn't do anything sneaky like changing the numbers, but the methods they used have limitations. These limitations start at the womb, then early childhood, and finally at school. So let's start at the very beginning, the womb. Life in the womb is great, not a care in the world. And since you're connected to your mother, you don't need to feed yourself. But there's one disadvantage to being connected to someone. Yes, you're getting nutrients from that person, but you're also at the mercy of every single bad events that she experiences.
Minor league baseball player has lost his job after video surfaced of him beating his girlfriend to the ground.
All of these events will influence your development and ultimately how you turn out. This is something that is not taken into account in these twin studies. Here's a clip of famous neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky talking about
Once again, an area that has been utterly underappreciated in this whole field is the whole world of prenatal environmental effects. And the theme that's going to come out of that is environment does not begin at birth, and some environmental effects prenatally are enormously influential forever after. And if you showed up on the scene 1 second after that individual was born, all of the tools of modern behavior genetics would tell you that you were looking at a genetic trait where it is one instead that was brought about by the prenatal environment.
Not only are twins sharing the same womb, there's another thing that is common between every single pair of twins separated at birth. They all went through the adoption process. So, is the adoption process stressful? To answer this question, let me describe to you where Robert Pullman, the author of the book mentioned by Chris Williamson, found the mothers willing to be part of one of his adoption studies. During the end of the 1960s and early 1970s, the sexual revolution was on full throttle. People were getting tired of the prude attitude of their parents and started removing the taboos around sex. Playboy just started, students were protesting the Vietnam War, and love was the answer.
That love is the answer. One more time.
However, abortion was still banned, and a lot of women who partook in the sexual revolution got pregnant out of wedlock, meaning that they committed one of the worst sins you can commit, having premarital sex.
P. Martin will return to the story of Unwed Mother in 1 minute.
This led many of these women, mostly religious, in order to avoid shame from their community, to escape to homes for unwed mother, where they could secretly deliver their baby and immediately after give them up for adoption.
What happens to an unmarried girl who finds herself pregnant? Many turn to the numerous homes for unwed mothers across the nation, like the home at the Salvation Army's Booth Memorial Hospital in New York.
These homes are where Robert Pullman found his volunteers for the Colorado Adoption Project. Now, I don't want to make too many assumptions here, but this seems to me more stressful than your average pregnancy. This is not even the full picture. It gets even more complex once they grow up. Once they've been adopted, the pair of twins grow up in different homes with different parents. Mission accomplished, the scientists say. We've separated nature and nurture. But did they really? How different are the homes that the pair of twins were put into? Turns out, they're not that different. Most of them are middle class, and when the homes of adoptive parents were evaluated, they scored better than 70% of homes in the US. Even Robert admitted it in his book. He said, I quote, "Although many more newborns were available for adoption in the early 1970s than are now, it was still not easy to adopt a child. The adoptive parents were interviewed extensively about their reasons for wanting to adopt a child, and they had to agree to visits by a social worker to assess the suitability of their home." Now, to explain to you why twins being raised in similar homes limits our ability to make accurate conclusions, we'll need a whiteboard. Okay, so we're all a product of our genes plus our environment. Nothing more, nothing less. So if you do a study to test the influence of genes on our behavior, you need to have environments that are as different as possible. Because if not, if the environments are too similar, you're essentially subtracting the variable from the equation. And then the only thing left to explain your behavior are genes. In the book Intelligence and How to Get It, the author said that for the studies to be accurate in the United States, the twins would have to be in environments that differed as much as any two people selected at random from the Google-based US telephone book. Now, to be fair to the researchers, this was probably the best method they had at the time. I doubt that any board of ethics would have approved kidnapping pairs of twins and then shipping them off across the country. But that's not all. Once the twins reach school age, it becomes even harder to untangle nature from nurture. Now the twins have entered school. What else could be affecting our ability to separate nature from nurture? Well, let's take for example a pair of identical twins. They share 100% of their genes. That means that if they live in the same culture, they most likely will be treated the same. For example, if both twins are 6 feet 5 inches, they're more likely to gravitate towards sports like basketball. Similarly, if the twins are genetically more attractive, they could receive preferential treatment and have a more positive school experience. Conversely, if the twins have a genetic predisposition to acne, they may face more bullying. So although basketball genes and bullying genes do not exist, the same genes in similar environments will tend to produce the same effect. So in the end, this gene-environment interplay leads to the creation of a more homogeneous environment, thus making it even harder to accurately measure the effects of nature on a person. Pause. I spent this entire time talking about the environment like it was a simple concept. But what is an environment? If you go see a psychiatrist, is that considered environment? If that psychiatrist gives you a magic pill that cures your depression, is that also considered environment? And if it is, that would mean that depression later in life in this hypothetical world is 0% determined by your genes. Those questions are why I will not give you new percentages to replace those of the twin studies, because those percentages are at best a snapshot in time of our understanding of the human mind. The better question should be instead, what can we do to change our environment? Okay, let's unpause this. To conclude, the twin studies are not bad per se, they're only bad when you do not understand their limitations. I've often heard when talking to people online these studies being brought up to justify racist policies, because they say if 50 to 80% of our intelligence is determined by genes, well that would mean that for example black people are less intelligent not because of racism, but because of their inferior genes. But in reality, if we take those three limitations, we can arrive at a much simpler conclusion. Identical twins put in more or less the same environment will turn out more or less the same. Okay, I've spent this entire video talking about how these studies are imperfect, but they still provided very valuable insight. For one, we now know with better certainty that the more similar an environment is, the more genes will dictate the differences between people. Also, we now know that there are genes that can increase the likelihood of developing an undesirable condition. This means that if a person has a gene that increases their likelihood of having, for example, depression, we could, in the future, suggest ways to change their environment to decrease that likelihood. This video started out as an essay published on my Substack called Equality of Opportunity Must Start in the Womb. It was then rewritten to fit the video format. So if you want to be part of this essay to video process, you can click on the link in the description and give your feedback before an essay gets turned into a video. Perhaps you'll make a difference in how we write it.